go to all the debts and see which you can refinance to get to the lowest interest possible to cut down your monthly expenses and thus increase your cash inflow. From there, as far as your question on like which debts do you tackle first, I'm immediately going to go to the highest paying interest. Statistically, that will actually reduce your interest costs as opposed to paying off the lowest balance first. And then also I'm looking at what the debt's on.
Today we got Doug Raible here from Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh investor. Thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invite. I appreciate it and hoping we can add some value to your audience here.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about finance first. And this is going to be a 3-part series that we're going to go through. We'll do the finance, then we'll do some business stuff, and then some real estate at the end for all you hustlers out there. Doug is a big player here in Pittsburgh. Tell us a little bit first about what it is you do so that people can kind of understand that.
Yeah, so simply put, I'm a financial advisor as well as an investor. As far as kind of a more micro breakdown of what I'm involved here in Pittsburgh, I'm co-owner of a full-service financial firm. So we handle pretty much anything with a dollar sign for clients and businesses, insurance, investments, budgeting, planning, tax strategies. And then on the real estate side, I do have a real estate portfolio. I own some mortgage notes that I've loaned on. I've done flips. I've done sales. I have a notary license to actually perform closings as well. So those are kind of what takes up the majority of my day. I do also do some consulting on the side for people trying to build businesses and looking for guidance on, marketing and videography as well.
Sounds like you're real busy.
The goal is to be busy now so the money works and then I don't have to be busy.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So for the listeners, because this segment here is about finance, where do you think that people should kind of start when understanding finance? I know there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of different coaches and gurus and what your parents say and what, your teachers say. Where should somebody start kind of middle of the pack? They've been working for a few years and they're thinking about financial planning and kind of getting their finances right. Where do they start?
So the first thing is to think about what's best for you, especially when it comes to just getting involved in investing in general, which is normally what people think of when they think about their, financial management. The one common mistake I see with so many people is that they watch a YouTube video or they see a friend making money or a family member does this and they're successful and they automatically just want to copy those money-making activities. The unfortunate part is everyone's different, so it's pretty crucial to kind of figure out what's your skill set and then focus on that. And what I mean by that is there's so many different ways that you can invest and manage your money, anything from literally short-term savings to investing in debt securities to real estate investment trusts, stocks, mutual funds. There's just unlimited ways that you could put money to work to benefit your future. And the first thing I would always say is to understand what you're skilled at as well as what you enjoy, because it's definitely difficult to take the time to learn all these topics. So if you don't like what you're doing, it's just like anything. Yeah, you'll maybe stick with it for a couple weeks, but then after that, you're just going to probably let it sit to the side. So I would say step one is to kind of understand yourself, what you're good at, and then what you actually enjoy learning about. And then from there, it just comes down to actually putting a plan to place. So budgeting was going to be number one, making sure that you have a significant amount of cash set aside that when life happens, which unfortunately people don't think about the bad things in life, but you should always protect against things like losing a job or, business failure, getting sick, issues with the family, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that you have a nice safety net of cash to protect against that. Once you get to that point, that's when I would start suggesting that people look into those different investment vehicles to actually generate that wealth or that income so that they're not 100% dependent on that 9-to-5 job or working 7 days a week for their business.
Yeah, that seems like great advice. So if we kind of roll it back a bit and look at what maybe the average American has, there's usually debt involved, right? And those debts, I think, come in the form of 3 different things, right? There's usually student or educational debt, there's credit card debt, and then their home or mortgage debt, right? How aggressively should they go after those debts before they build this kind of savings account and then move on to the investment? So like what order should they tackle those debts in?
So I would always suggest that the cash comes first. At the end of the day, if you have enough liquidity and savings, you can kind of make a few months debt payments if life goes horribly wrong. So the first thing is always your reserves. You want to make sure that you have that safety net. And just from like a mental standpoint, knowing that you can get through a couple bad months just makes you feel a little bit better and less stressful. But as far as the debts go, you're 100% right. So most, especially younger people, you're pretty much guaranteed to have school loans. People are now, as you said, middle of the line. They've been working for 4 or 5 years. Maybe they're getting married or having kids, and they're thinking about buying a house. And obviously, you're going to take on a mortgage for that. So that's going to be involved. And then last would be anything from like auto, even credit comes into play, credit cards. My first thing on the debt is I want to know what is the debt actually on, meaning what's the collateral. So does that mean it's on a property, an investment property, a business, your school loans, credit card, whatever that is? That's really important because, for instance, with credit card debt, a lot of times you're going to be paying about 16 to even upwards of 20% interest. Even if you're crushing it with an investment or your business, it's almost impossible to kind of fight that 16 to 18% interest coming against you each month. And then also same thing with a business or a property. If it's something that can produce income for you or appreciate in value, I'm okay with having that debt because it's actually on a solid asset. It's not something fighting against you generally. So that's the first step is what is your debt actually on? Is it something that can benefit you in the future or is it something that's going to drag you down? And then the next thing I would look for is what are the different interest rates? Can you shop around and reduce the interest rate on your school loans or your mortgage or the car? Even dropping it just a couple percent interest, if it's on a $100,000 loan, that could be, hundreds of dollars a month potentially that was just a straight expense that now is going to be increasing your cash flow.
Right. And that's probably a good place for a lot of people to start. Like we said, people maybe under 30 that have at least 1 degree, sometimes 2 or more degrees. They're probably have acquired a large sum of debt in the educational system. And if they need to refi those loans, that's probably a good place to start to drive that number down, especially if you have like 5 different payments, right? You took it over multiple periods of time and you consolidate those loans in a way that makes sense, or at least get down to 1 payment or a better interest rate. So I think that those are all good points. What about individuals with, they're tackling their student debt, no problem. They're renting currently. What's your financial advice on switching from a rental into like a mortgage, actually purchasing a property? What are your thoughts there?
So I honestly don't have a concern with renting. I think that buying a home should come after a certain amount of things are checked off. One being that you know where you want to live, you're totally stabilized. You say like, I love this area. I plan to live here for the next 5 to 10 years. If you're going to hop around or maybe get a new job somewhere or might need to sell that property quickly, I am completely fine with renting over owning. The second thing that comes into play is how much money do you have to put down as well as how much liquid savings do you have in reserves. The thing that people don't consider with home ownership is when you own the home, you're in charge of every single cost, whether you like it or not. So besides the property taxes, which people don't consider, the insurances, the interest on the mortgage, you have to pay for if something happens with the plumbing, roof goes bad. Those are all big things that are going to cost money that if you're renting, you don't have to take care of those costs. In fact, a lot of places, you don't even have to pay for water and sewage, which is a monthly bill you can save. The next thing is, besides how long you're going to be there, is to consider how much money you would want to put down. So for me personally, if I'm ever going to buy a property, whether it's for myself personally or for an investment, I require at least 10 to 20% equity in the home. And for anyone who doesn't understand what that means in plain English, basically it means that if a house is worth $100,000, I would want either to buy the house for $80,000 to $90,000, or I would have to require that they put down $10,000 to $20,000 in order to buy that house. And the reason I do that instead of, suggesting that people take on these like 3% loans or even some crazy like 1% down loans is, again, if you need to sell that property or if something happens, if the market value goes down even a little bit, you're going to literally have to bring money to sell that house. And two is people don't understand the closing costs. For a transaction, it's probably about 7 to 10% of the purchase price. So if you, let's say, buy a house for $100,000 and you put down $3,000, that means you only have $3,000 of equity basically in the home. And let's say next year you lose your job or you find out you're moving across the country and you can't afford two places and you want to sell this house. You're going to have to probably bring, if you're lucky enough to get another buyer to buy it at $100,000, you're going to have to bring like $9,000 to the table just to pay for those costs to actually sell that house. So that's the thing that I think that people overlook is if you need to leave quickly, it can actually be harmful to own that property. But then vice versa, if you do plan to stay there for a long time, you have some cash reserves, you have money to put down, 100% it makes sense to buy a house because then you could start building that equity and actually gaining an asset.
Right. And that probably makes sense too. You're definitely right in the fact that people don't think about those extra costs, right? Like if you're looking at cash flow monthly and you say you have $5,000 gross monthly and you have $1,000 rent payment, there's no way for that same property you're going to have $1,000 mortgage payment, right? Once you add all that stuff in. And that's just assuming monthly cash flow.
Exactly. That's the thing. People see like the mortgage principal. Yeah, the mortgage principal might be $600-700, and they say, "Oh, that's way better than renting." But when you include some taxes or $4,000 a year, $3,000 a year, that's an extra $300 a month. And then you have the insurance, and then you have all the utilities and upkeep and things like that, which isn't a problem, if that's the end goal. But it's just costs that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration. And then that's when they can get to the issue of, hey, we can't save any money, or hey, we're wondering how bills are going to get paid because our cash flow is diminished more than we thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts on cash flow versus total cash? I know a lot of people talk about, how much they got in the bank and all that, but I think at the end of the day, cash flow is probably the most important if you're looking at not even in the investment vehicles, but just cash flow on a day-to-day, managing your debt, your payments and all that. Do you value cash flow more or do you value total asset more?
That's a tough one because I guess they're kind of two different concepts. For me personally, I would like me feeling more comfortable knowing that I have a bunch of cash set aside. So that would be like the cash reserves, I guess I would find more important, because even if times are tough for 6 months, I'm like, okay, I could take care of things and kind of keep living that same standard of living. But long term, the cash flow is going to be really what determines if you're going to be, well off or just kind of getting by. Because, right, if you have an extra $5,000 a month and then something pops up and it's $5,000 that month, you're like, that was a crappy month, but I got another 5 coming in next month, and then the next month, and the next month. So they're kind of two different conversations. But if you're asking me, like, just today, what would be more important to me, I'd probably say the reserves, just because I know that I can get by if times are tough.
Sure. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think a lot of people, if you look at some of these stats I see rolling around online when I do a little research, they talk about how, a $500 expense that pops up, the average American family can't even afford to cover that without some type of debt, right? Either a credit card or, like you said, non-cash
crazy.
reserve payment. And that's $500. It's not even 5,000 like you were talking about, right? So losing a job and having a mortgage payment is going to be something that's super troublesome for those people, which is why renting, like you're saying, is probably a safer play because your cash flow is very consistent. And even if you do have a bad month, it's probably less than owning that home when you have a $20,000 roof you need to do. So I think
that's the biggest thing.
Right. I agree with you 100% there. So kind of as a recap for our microfinance session here, where do you think people should spend their money first? So they have a little credit card debt. They have a little let's say home debt, right? Because they got the mortgage, and they have a little bit of car debt plus their student loans. What should they attack first, and how should they go about attacking that?
Sure. So if you're looking at your finances from 100 feet up and you're looking at everything and how it kind of works together, my very first thing is going to be get yourself to at least 4 to 5 months of your expenses in cash. Because that'll, like I said, that'll get you through on a conservative basis. That'll get you through a lot of, down months. So that's check number one. Then the next thing would be to go to all the debts and see which you can refinance to get to the lowest interest possible to cut down your monthly expenses and thus increase your cash inflow. From there, as far as your question on like which debts do you tackle first, I'm immediately going to go to the highest paying interest. Statistically, that will actually reduce your interest costs as opposed to paying off the lowest balance first. And then also I'm looking at what the debt's on. So for me personally, I have debts on real estate that produce income and appreciate in value. So I don't really care to necessarily pay those down as quickly as possible. Whereas if I had a credit card debt of 10 grand and it was 18% annually, I'm going to attack that as quickly as possible. So it's going to be the higher interest debts and the debts that aren't on an actual asset. Once you get to that level, I feel like you kind of have a solid foundation where it's like a blank canvas and you just start painting, right? Where do you want to start investing this money? Where do you want to start growing your real wealth? And then that comes down to really you're going to have a couple options. One is the financial markets. The next is going to be real estate markets. And then last is going to be actually investing in businesses. So I always suggest the financial markets first because one, they're liquid and accessible. If you need to click a button and cash out, you can literally do that, even if it requires a loss. The other thing is if you don't know what the heck you're doing, there's people out there, there's educational programs that they can actually manage the money for you for a small fee. And then that way it's essentially out of sight, out of mind. The people take care of it that you trust, and you're still reaping the benefits of growing that wealth. Whereas when you get into things like real estate or owning a business, you kind of have to be hands-on and really understand that. They also aren't liquid, meaning you can't turn them to cash quickly. You can't click a button and turn a property to cash if you need money tomorrow. You can't just automatically sell out of a business, the next day, right? So that would be kind of my steps to getting to that point where their foundation's set and that they're really making an impact on their long-term goals.
And if somebody wanted to, get some money management or some advice, how would they actually reach you? What would be the best way for them to get in contact with you, whether they're in Pittsburgh or someone that would fit kind of your market? How would they reach you?
Yeah, so social media is completely fine. I have, pretty much any account online if anyone ever wants to just send me a message, or I put up a ton of free content as well to follow along. We also have a website, sterlingheightsfinancial.com, where you can actually book meetings right online at your convenience. My phone number's on there, email. Pretty easy to contact me if you search me online.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for this session on finance.
No, absolutely. I appreciate this, and hopefully that some people can find some value in this and get their financial self started strong here in 2020.